Wyoming Territory, late September 1874. The morning frost still clung to the grass when Quentin Ashford stepped out of his barn and found a woman sitting against the side of it, knees pulled close to her chest, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to disappear. Her dress hung off her like it belonged to someone else, face pale and drawn, hair sticking to her cheek in damp strands. She didn't look up when the barn door creaked shut behind him. He stopped in his tracks. There were wolves out here, and not all of them walked on four legs. "Ma'am?" he asked, voice low but firm. She flinched like the word stung. Then, slowly, she raised her chin. Her eyes were sharp blue, too big for her face, but they locked on him without blinking. "I am not here to steal," she said. "I just needed somewhere to sit before I fell over." She sounded like she meant it. Quentin looked her over. She had no bag, no horse. Just the threadbare dress, boots worn to the sole, and a tiredness that ran deeper than hunger. "You alone?" he asked. She nodded. "My name is Helena. Helena Atley." He stepped closer, frowning. "You do not look like you have eaten in days." "I have not eaten in 3, she said, matter of fact, like that was just how life went. Quentin exhaled through his nose, gave one more glance toward the empty fields, then offered his hand. "Come on. You are not staying out here." Helena stared at his hand for a second, then took it. Her fingers were cold and thin, but her grip had a surprising firmness. He helped her to her feet slowly, careful not to startle her. She swayed once, but caught herself. "My house is just over there," he said, tipping his head toward the cabin a short walk away. "You can sit by the stove. Warm up. I do not want your charity." He looked her straight in the eye. "It is not charity. You are a person, not a stray dog." She blinked fast, then nodded once. Inside the cabin, Quentin lit the stove and set water to boil. He handed her a clean cup and poured in the coffee once it was ready. She drank it slow, both hands wrapped around the tin mug like it was a lifeline. He cooked eggs, fried up the last of the salt pork, and slid the plate toward her. She hesitated just a second before picking up the fork. She did not speak while she ate, but her eyes welled up halfway through. "Where are you coming from?" he asked, not unkindly. "South," she said. "My husband died 6 weeks ago. Typhoid." She took a breath. "I tried to go back to my sister's in Denver, but the wagon broke down outside Laramie. I sold what I had left to make it this far." Quentin's jaw tightened. "And no one helped you?" She gave a faint shrug. "I had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were taken in by a preacher's wife in Rawlins 3 weeks ago. Said she could feed them better than I could." Her voice cracked slightly. "I told them I would come back for them." Quentin sat back slowly. "What are their names?" "Elias is 6. Eliza is 4. She looked down at her empty plate. "They were all I had left." He did not speak for a long moment. The wind scratched at the windows and the fire popped in the stove. "You said your name is Helena Atley?" he asked finally. She nodded. "Well, Helena Atley," he said, standing. "You are welcome to stay here until you are strong enough to go back and get them." She blinked at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you are not a stray dog," he said again, this time gentler. Helena stayed. At first, she barely spoke. She helped where she could, washing dishes, sweeping floors, feeding the chickens, but she moved like a woman half-ghost, unsure if she belonged in the land of the living. She slept in the spare room with the door cracked open, and sometimes he heard her cry at night. She always did it quiet. Quentin did not push. He just made sure there was warm bread in the mornings and hot stew at night. He let her ride his mare once she was strong enough to sit a saddle again. She started smiling after a week. They were small smiles, soft things, but they stayed longer each time. One afternoon, he found her sitting on the back porch with a mending basket in her lap, sunlight catching her hair. "You always sit that quiet?" he asked, stepping up beside her. "Only when I do not want to be seen," she said with a quick glance his way. "You want to be seen now?" Helena paused, then nodded. "I think so." He took a breath. "I lost someone too. My brother. He died in the war. Buried somewhere near Atlanta." She looked over at him. "Were you close?" "Closer than I knew," he said. "I did not realize it until he was gone." They sat there a while, not talking. The chickens clucked in the yard and the wind carried the scent of pine and riverstone. "I am not going back to Denver," she said quietly. Quentin looked over. "I want to go back to Rawlins. I want my children back, but I cannot do it alone." She met his eyes. "Would you come with me?" He did not hesitate. "Yes." They left 5 days later. Helena rode on his mare while he walked beside her. It was a 3-day journey to Rawlins, and every mile seemed to pull her straighter, stronger. At night, they camped under the stars, and she told him stories about Elias's laugh and Eliza's love for wildflowers. He listened, always close, always watching her like she mattered. Like she was more than the too-skinny widow who had collapsed outside his barn. On the second night, she reached for his hand while they lay beside the fire. He did not pull away. In Rawlins, the preacher's wife met them on the church steps, eyes wide when she saw Helena. "You came back," she whispered. "I told them I would," Helena said, voice steady. The children came running, barefoot and crying, straight into her arms. Elias clung to her waist. Eliza buried her face in her neck. Helena held them both and wept. Quentin stood back, watching the three of them, something thick rising in his throat. Later, when the sun dipped low and they walked back toward the hotel, Helena slipped her hand into his again. "I meant it," she said softly. "I do not want to go back to Denver." He looked at her. "Where do you want to go?" "Home," she said. "If you will have us." Quentin squeezed her hand. "I have been waiting for you to ask." And just like that, the cold Wyoming wind did not feel so bitter anymore. The road home was longer with children, but quieter in the right ways. Eliza slept mostly, curled against Helena with her thumb hooked at her collar. Elias watched everything, his eyes darting from the sky to the ground like each mile held a secret. Quentin had packed the wagon bed with blankets and dry bread, and Helena rode beside him now, a steadying presence rather than a shadow of herself. It was early October by the time they reached the edge of his land. The aspens had gone gold and the wind carried a sharper edge. Helena stood in the wagon bed and pointed toward the barn. "Eliza," she said, brushing the child's hair back, "that's where I found your way back to me." Eliza squinted into the sun, thoughtful. "It doesn't look like a magic place." "It was," Helena answered. "You just can't always see it." Quentin tied off the team and lifted Elias down first, then Eliza, then held out a hand to Helena without needing to ask. She pressed her palm into his as she stepped down, steady but slow. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. She walked past the barn and toward the cabin like she belonged to the land now. Inside, the hearth still held the last of the coals he'd banked before they left. Helena knelt and coaxed them back to life with practiced movements. Elias wandered to the window and stood on his toes to see the pasture. Eliza curled up beneath the quilt on the rocker and watched her mother move. "Do you have horses?" Elias asked. "I have 2 now," Quentin said, setting a pot of water beside the hearth. "You like to ride?" "I've never tried." "We'll fix that." Helena looked over her shoulder, eyes meeting Quentin's for a beat longer than they needed to. Then she turned back to the fire. That night, when the children fell asleep beneath new quilts, Helena stepped outside. The sky was clear, stars sharp and cold above the timberline. Quentin was splitting kindling by the fence. "I don't think I remember how to live in quiet," she said. He didn't stop his work. "Takes time. And wantin' to." She leaned her hip against the fence post. "I want to. But I keep listening for things I used to dread. Wagons I didn't know. Footsteps that stopped too close. They won't come here." She nodded once, not as agreement but as understanding. "You sleep any better yet?" he asked. "Some. When Eliza's curled against me, I don't wake up so fast." He set the axe down and looked up. "You don't owe me anything, Helena. You don't have to stay just because I brought you back." "I know," she said. Her voice was soft, but not uncertain. "But I want to build something here." Quentin took off his gloves, stuffing them into his coat pocket. "Most days, it's just work and seasons passing. Not much else. I don't mind that. He nodded toward the cabin. Tomorrow, I'll set up a stall for your mare. If you're staying, she'll need a place of her own. She already has one, Helena said. You gave her that. He looked at her then, not just as a woman who had come broken to his door, but as someone who had chosen to stand beside him now that she didn't have to. Her shoulders had filled out. Her hands no longer trembled when she reached for things. I can teach Elias to read, she said, and help Eliza with her letters. I used to teach before. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. You could start again, he said. I think I already have. They stood there without need for more. The wind shifted through the trees, and somewhere off near the river, an owl called once. Helena stepped closer, her hand brushing his forearm. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. I thought I would be. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just let her stay close. After a while, she slid her fingers into his. Inside, Elias stirred and the rocker creaked as Eliza turned in her sleep. Helena glanced back toward the glow of the cabin window. I want them to wake up safe every day, she said. I want them to grow up knowing they're wanted. They will, Quentin said. They already are. Her breath clouded in the air. She looked at him, not with thanks, not with apology, just a steady, quiet knowing. I'll make coffee in the morning, she said. And eggs, if the hens are kind. They usually are, he said, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. But they like you. So I reckon they'll try harder. She smiled, not the kind that passed through, but the kind that stayed. Then she turned and walked back toward the cabin. Quentin watched until she disappeared through the door. He stood a while longer in the cold. The stars didn't move, but something in him did. Something that hadn't shifted in years. And for the first time since the war took his brother, he felt like the house wasn't just his anymore. It was theirs. The first true snow came in late October, heavy and wet, blanketing the ridgeline and muting sound across the pasture. Quentin had already hauled in the last of the root vegetables and stacked firewood high under the lean-to. Helena laid extra quilts over the children's beds and taught Elias to fold kindling with care, not haste. Eliza followed her everywhere, dragging a rag doll Helena had sewn from old flour sackcloth and spare lace. That morning, Quentin stood at the window after breakfast, looking out at the slow-moving white. Helena was tying a kerchief around her braid, sleeves rolled to her elbows as she wiped down the table. You ever spent a winter this far north? He asked, eyes on the tree line. She shook her head. Not past Cheyenne. And not with anything of my own to protect. He turned to face her. It gets long. And cold enough to change the way a man thinks. Helena set the cloth down and met his gaze. I've lived through things longer and colder than winter, Quentin. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed the room, picked up her shawl from the back of the rocker, and held it out to her. You want to come with me to the riverbank? Trapline won't check itself. She took the shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders, then nodded. Let me tell Eliza where I'm going. They left Elias flipping pages in a primer and Eliza kneeling at the hearth with her doll tucked in a small wooden cradle Quentin had carved with his pocket knife one evening when no one was watching. The walk down to the river was hushed. Trees sagged under the weight of snow and the water moved slow, thick with ice at the edges. Quentin crouched by the first trap, his breath fogging the air. Helena stayed a few paces back, watching him work. Did you always live out here? Since I was 17, he said, resetting the spring with practiced fingers. My brother and I bought the land together. After he died, I couldn't think of anywhere else to go. She knelt across from him, brushing snow from a patch of moss. You never thought of leaving? I did, he said. But I think I was waiting for something worth staying for. She held his gaze a moment, then bent and helped him clear the next trap. They worked without speaking, hands close, breath clouding and mingling in the air between them. At the third trap, she paused. You ever think about what you'd be if things had gone different? He sat back on his heels. If the war hadn't happened? If your brother had come home? If I'd never left Denver? He rubbed his gloves together. I used to think about that every night. What he'd be like now. If he'd have married. Had a boy to teach the land to. And now I think we're here because we're meant to be. I don't know if I believe in much, but I believe in that. When they got back to the house, Elias was hunched over the table with a sheet of paper and charcoal. Eliza was asleep on the floor, the doll tucked beside her. Elias looked up. "I drew the house." Quentin crouched beside him. "You did, huh? Let's see." The cabin leaned a little and the barn was too tall, but the smoke from the chimney curled just right. Helena touched the corner of the paper. "What's that there?" "That's the four of us," he said. "You're holding Eliza's hand. And Quentin's got the axe." Quentin met Helena's eyes. She didn't speak, but her fingers curled slightly on the table. That night, after the children had gone to bed and the fire burned low, Helena stood at the window. Snow still fell, soft against the panes. Quentin came to stand beside her. "I've never had a season that didn't end in leaving," she said. "Until now." "You're not leaving," he said. She turned toward him. "I know." He reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her temple, slow and sure. Her eyes didn't drop. "I don't know what to call what we have," she said. "You don't have to call it anything," he said. "Just live it." She stepped closer, and when she rested her head against his chest, he wrapped his arms around her without hesitation. The fire cracked. Wind whispered at the eaves. For the first time, she let herself be still. And Quentin, who had learned to live with silence, now found peace in the soft sound of her breathing against him. The days shortened, and with them came a deeper quiet, the kind that settled into the bones and made even the children's voices softer. Helena took to rising before the sun, slipping into her coat and pulling water from the well before the frost thickened. Quentin had repaired the roofline after the last windstorm, and now the cabin held heat more easily. Each evening, when the stovepipe hummed low and the children slept under quilts stitched from scraps, Helena wrote small lines in a torn ledger she kept beneath the flour tin notes on planting, on days without fear, on the sound Eliza made when she laughed in her sleep. One afternoon, Quentin returned from town with a canvas bundle slung over his shoulder. He set it on the table without explanation and busied himself hanging his coat. Helena eyed the bundle. "That for me or the dog we don't have?" He pulled out a bolt of wool and a folded paper pattern. "Storekeeper's wife is teaching me how to read measurements. Said this might suit a dress. You planning to start wearing dresses, then?" He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "No, but I thought maybe you'd like something not made from a grain sack." Helena stared at the fabric, then at him. "You picked blue. Your shawl's wearing thin. And Eliza said you look like sky when you wear that shade." She ran her hand over the wool, quiet for a moment. "I haven't sewn for myself in years." "Well," he said, "seems time you did." That night, after the children were asleep, she laid the pattern out on the table and began marking the fabric with charcoal. Quentin watched from the rocker, turning wood shavings in his palm. "You ever think of marrying again?" she asked without looking up. He took his time answering. "Only once I met someone I could trust with silence." She didn't move her hand, but her eyes lifted to his. "Some folks don't know what to do with quiet. I do." She folded the fabric over carefully. "I don't need a man to raise my children. I've made it this far without one." He rested his boot against the hearthstone. "I'm not offering to raise them for you. I'm offering to stand beside them." She let the silence stretch. "Then, and beside me?" "If you'll let me." Helena rose, brushed the charcoal from her fingers, and crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the faint line where her braid had tugged loose. "I was afraid of being alone," she said. "But I think I was more afraid of being seen." "You're not invisible, Helena." His voice was low. "Not here." She reached for his hand, not tentative, but sure. "I won't be a burden." "I never thought you were." He stood, tall and steady, and she didn't step back. They didn't kiss, not yet, but the space between them shifted, the way a river bends when the thaw comes early. Later, she sat at the table again, her needle pulling through the wool with even strokes. Quentin added another log to the stove and leaned his shoulder against the wall, watching her. The firelight caught the curve of her cheek, the line of her wrist as she worked. "Elias asked if he could help with the fence line tomorrow," he said. "He said he wants to earn his own boots." She didn't look up. "He likes the way you talk to him. Like you expect him to listen." "I do. Most men only expect children to stay out of the way. Then most men are fools." She smiled, faint but real. "You're not most men." "No," he said. I'm just the one who found you on the coldest morning of my life. She tied off the thread and looked up. And I was the one who thought I'd never be warm again. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a hush. Inside, the fire burned steady and the quiet between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of all the things they hadn't needed to say because they were already living them. By early December, the snow packed firm enough for a sled, and Quentin built one from spare pine boards and iron runners he scavenged from an old plow. Elias helped, watching every cut and nail with quiet focus. When it was finished, Quentin handed the boy the rope and stepped back. "You're the first rider," he said. Elias didn't hesitate. He climbed on, grinning as Quentin gave him a push across the yard. Eliza clapped from the porch, wrapped in a coat Helena had taken in from an old riding jacket. Helena stood behind her, arms crossed against the cold, watching them with a look that held something rooted and quiet. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Quentin sat beside Helena near the stove, sharpening the blade of a draw knife. She threaded a patch into Elias's only good trousers, her fingers steady. "I saw your name carved into the barn wall," she said. "Next to another. Walter." Quentin set the blade down gently. "My brother. You carved it. We did it together. First spring we came. Thought we'd turn this place into something big. 2 families, maybe 3. Had plans for an orchard." She folded the fabric over her knee. "You ever think about planting it still?" "I've cleared the land twice. Always stopped before setting the roots." Helena looked at him, thread paused in her hand. "If you did it now, it wouldn't be for what you lost." "No," he said. "It'd be for what's come after." She nodded once, eyes steady on his. "I'd like to help." He leaned back in the chair, nodding toward the patchwork bag near her feet. "You've already started." She set the pants aside and reached into the bag, pulling out a folded piece of brown paper. "I sent to Cheyenne for these," she said. "Pear seedlings. Just instructions for now. The trees wait till spring." He took the paper from her, running his thumb along the edge. "You've got plans. I've got land. And a man who knows how to dig a proper furrow." He looked up then, and her expression didn't waver. "I'd marry you," he said, plain and certain. Helena's lips parted, but she didn't speak for a moment. "I'm not asking for what you were before," he added. "Just for what you are now. You and them both." She stood, walked to him, and knelt beside his chair. Her hand found his palm to palm. "I want to wake up in the same house, under the same roof, and know it's mine too," she said. "I want to grow roots deeper than any orchard." He drew her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then let's do it right." They married quietly just after the New Year. The preacher from town came out by sleigh, his wife bringing a loaf of brown bread and a worn book of hymns. Eliza wore a ribbon in her hair, and Elias stood beside Quentin, proud and solemn. Helena wore the blue dress she'd sewn, the hem stitched in pale thread like frost. When the vows were said and the fire burned high behind them, Quentin turned to Helena and touched her cheek with the back of his hand. "You're home now," he said. "I always was," she whispered. That spring, they planted the orchard 10 saplings in a row behind the barn, each one staked and watered with care. Elias carried the buckets, and Eliza sang to them softly, her voice no louder than the wind in the branches. Quentin and Helena worked side by side, sleeves rolled, hands dirt-stained. When the last root was buried, they stood together and looked out over the line of trees. "This is what I was missing," Helena said. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "You're not missing anything anymore." That summer, the cabin changed. Elias took on chores without being asked. Eliza learned to read by oil lamp, her finger tracing each letter like it was a stone in a path. Helena carved a small shelf for her ledger and filled it with notes about planting, about laughter at supper, about the scent of pear blossoms beginning to unfurl. And each night, when the children slept and the fire burned low, Quentin would pull her close, her head tucked beneath his chin, and he'd listen to her breathe, not because he feared silence, but because he'd come to understand the sound of peace. They lived that way, season by season, not perfect but steady. There were lean months and storms and mornings when fences needed mending before breakfast. But there was no more running, no more waiting for shoes to drop. Just 4 people who had chosen one another again and again. Years later, when the orchard bore its first full fruit, Helena handed Quentin a pear, its skin golden and warm from the sun. "Worth the wait?" she asked. He bit into it, juice running down his thumb. "So are you," he said, and she kissed him there, under the trees they'd planted together, while their children laughed in the distance and the wind carried the scent of something good and lasting across the fields.